Okay, I wanted to pick up where we left off. There's just a couple of last slides following our discussion on kind of the actual operations that happen day to day. So if you remembered, we talked a lot about the sort of daytime versus real-time markets and how they end up adjusting the generation to meet actual load needs. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was, in real-time operations, some of the measures that are taken to prevent like larger cascading failures, right? And so normal operations, we were talking about, the forecast errors that happen and then the adjustments that take place to prevent like larger systemic risks. Then you have these sort of catastrophic failures where you have constraints that are binding, you have a lot of these maybe contingencies that are adding up, and operators start to essentially lose control, right? So the idea is, how do we keep us from going from normal operation to catastrophic risk? So N- security, this is a concept that helps drive a lot of the reliability and resilience measures that the operators take to prevent large-scale failures. Who was at the CAISO for Power Trip? Did any of you guys get to go to that? Yeah, a couple of you. And so if you'll recall, there was actually one whole portion of their like control panel, right, that was dedicated to this thing. And so this is obviously something that's taken pretty seriously. This means essentially that if you lose any single critical element of the grid, like if an entire transmission line goes down or a big generator goes offline, right, or you lose transformers or large DC ties, if any of this fails for any reason, the idea is that the grid can still operate and withstand that sort of catastrophic failure event. And so they're constantly running these scenarios of like, oh, what if we take certain types of assets out of commission? And they can see which ones are kind of the riskiest ones as well, right? And so the idea is you kind of have this flow of tools that you can employ to do this, right? And so in the contingency analysis, they actually simulate the loss of one of those assets, like a generator or transmission line, right? And they're sort of large model that sort of simulates the behavior of the grid. And so you can check for all of these things: thermal overloads, voltage violations, loss of synchronism. And if an asset is lost and you start getting some of these issues, they may come up with a plan to address that, right? Maybe that means adding more spinning reserves or something, right? And so once you've done the simulation, that may help you to decide that, oh, I need to redispatch certain generators in order to prevent certain like emergency states from happening, and position reserves in a certain way. Sometimes those contingencies can't be managed, and then operators may take more serious measures, reducing transfers, committing additional generation, reconfiguring networks, that kind of escalate you towards more emergency operating procedures, right? And so this is, right, remember that all of this stuff that's happening are preemptive measures. This is like prior to a larger scale failure, in order to prevent those like cascading failures from taking place.
Seems like it's also great for them for justifying their actions. They can they did it according to that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that stuff is pretty easy to see. Yeah. It's pretty easy to understand that this stuff happens. You can show it directly in the model. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure anyone's really checking that stuff, but the validation is there if needed. Yeah, and then, so your general emergency procedures include deploying reserves, emergency commitments of certain generators, and then obviously the absolute last resort is load shedding, as we've talked about. So in the control room, right, there's all of these things that you want to take care of: interchange adjustments, shared reserves, avoiding unintended power swings, yeah, and then trying to prevent, even if you do have some kind of incident happening locally, that it doesn't propagate upstream to cause larger sort of regional problems. And so we talk mainly about ISO or whatever balancing authority, but they are actually coordinating with lots of other sort of entities as well, right? So, and that may extend beyond just kind of the electricity system. You might be talking to like gas system operators, and then you'll also be talking to transmission operators, other balancing authorities, and reliability coordinators. Right. Yeah, and so operators manage a lot of this uncertainty, conflicting objectives about managing your market in an efficient way, but maintaining reliability, and then imperfect information because you don't know what's going to happen. Your forecasts aren't always going to be right. And so a lot of these guys, a lot of that comes down to expert judgment through experience and operating in these areas. And they're at this kind of human level deciding when to intervene and how aggressively, right? That's not all some automated algorithm. There is a human element that kind of plays into the decision making here. Okay. So that is the end of the last lecture. Oops, I accidentally did that. Okay, and so today, jumping back into here, we'll be talking about electricity rates. So, why do we regulate utility rates? Electricity delivery, right? We've explored this concept a lot in terms of the ease with which we can kind of consider this a natural monopoly, right? There's a lot of monopolistic tendencies. You have infrastructure that's really high fixed costs, low marginal costs, and then duplicative infrastructure, or I should say, having duplicative elements of a system. We often like that for competition, but in this case, that's really inefficient, right? Because you wouldn't want 30 different power companies each investing billions of dollars to make a competitive electricity system. Your rates would be sky high, right? And so this lends itself to becoming kind of a natural monopoly. Yeah, and utilities, right, are granted exclusive service territories, so they have a captive audience. And so in order to ensure affordability, right, they're subject to rate regulation to prevent price gouging, but it also helps on the utility end to kind of guarantee cost recovery, but in a way that's done for public interest, right? So you can't just have utilities deploying stuff willy-nilly. It has to, let's say, make sense. Okay, so let's kind of walk through different elements of this. So paying for energy. So there is a component of the bills that you guys pay that is related to the energy consumption at the end use, right? And that is going to be reflective of the costs of actually producing that marginal unit of electricity to meet demand. So what types of things kind of factor into the energy piece? So fuel prices, right? Market purchases on the spot markets by the ISOs, right? There are contracts for purchasing electricity that's going to influence prices that people pay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on Thursday. You may have things like renewable energy attributes. So if you wanted to get like a renewable energy credit, right, that may have an effect on your bottom line. And then you may even have things like congestion or losses that could get bundled into the energy portion of your bill. Any questions about this so far? Okay, yes.
You want to upload the slides?
Oh, yes, we can do
You
that.
uploaded the lecture 13.
Yeah. All right, let me throw that in there real quick. Okay, should be appearing momentarily. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So procurement, which we're going to talk in a lot more detail in the next class, helps to shape some of the energy costs, right? So when we think about that energy portion on the bill, it's not just driven by fuel costs. So when we think about the ways that utilities purchase power, that they ultimately farm those costs out to your end customer, there's different ways that utilities can do this, right? So they can, in some cases, right, maybe they own the generation. That's going to be a little bit less common in the deregulated markets. And so, but in those cases, right, utility-run plants, that might be driven by contracts that are tied to the costs of operation, so that would be more sort of fixed O&M and fuel costs. When we think about the short-term market, right, for power purchases through ISO, that's going to be a lot more volatile, right? So that's going to be based on kind of clearing prices in the market, in addition to maybe thinking about the costs associated with transmission, congestion, and losses as well, so that from your LMPs, right? And so already we have differences in the characteristics of what determines your sort of energy prices. You could have power purchase agreements, which are going to be more sort of stable pricing, and then there could be other types of contracts that are more sort of policy driven. Yeah, so sometimes the utilities will hedge exposure to high prices to reduce market volatility. And so this is a way that will keep your prices from spiking too much when fuel prices go up, but will also make it so that you don't necessarily get the benefits of like lower costs if a generator ends up producing at lower cost than expected. Fuel cost pass-throughs can still affect rates. So even though these guys hedge to some degree, right, some portion of our electricity is still on the spot market, and so when your portfolios are partly made up of fuel prices or fuel costs that you see on those markets, you can get affected by volatility in the market. Right, and then regulated entities have to get approved for, you know, long-term types of procurements, and that can have an influence on the ultimate energy prices. So, all of this having been said, this is mainly a way for us to view the energy portions of our bills as not just driven by fuel prices, but there are like other sort of mechanisms, right, that utilities and power purchasers are taking that help determine your energy rates separate from the fuel prices or disconnected from fuel prices. Yeah.
Is there like a, I don't know, a real quick explanation of what it means to hedge?
Yeah. So you want to make a bet on something, right? Or maybe bet's the wrong word.
Investment.
Yeah. So let's say something maybe by default will cost, we expect it to cost $50, but there's some chance that it could cost $100, in which we'd pay a lot more, and there's some chance that it could cost $0, in which we would actually pay a lot less. So the hedge is like you make an agreement with that entity, some entity, and you say, okay, I expect to pay $50. And if that happens, then everyone's happy and nothing needs to change. But if the price spikes, then I'm still going to pay $50, and you have to pay out the remainder of that 100 in that price spike. But if it goes down to 0, then I still pay $50. I don't get the benefit of that price drop. So it is a way of shifting risk from one entity to another. And we're going to see how this plays out in the electricity sector via things like PPAs next class. And there are important reasons for why people, like, why would the second person even decide to do this, right? There actually are kind of good reasons that you would want to partake in this on kind of both ends of that bet. Yeah, it can help provide stability for certain members of that contract. And yeah, the important thing about hedging is that all it's doing is it's shifting risk from one entity to another.
Okay.
It's the the most important concept of that, yeah.
And apologies, you know, skip it if you're going to talk about it later, but does the Rex market fluctuate very much?
I mean, yes. I mean, it can, yeah. I don't know, like, there are a lot of nuances of how Rex markets work that make any, I think, general answer to that maybe a little bit tricky to say, because people will value, like, different entities can value Rex differently. Rex can be tied not only to the, like, type of generation, but also like locations because of policy constraints. So Uh, yes, I mean, they can get volatile. Yeah. Yeah, okay, and so procurement can lead to less volatility, right? And I think the example that I want you guys to kind of really take away is that if we consider like the price of electricity that would come out of like LMPs or real-time prices, the every 5-minute, 15-minute, or day ahead intervals that we're talking about, those prices go up and down a lot, right? But you guys do not pay fluctuating prices for the electricity on your bill, right? You pay these like weird semi-flat time of use fees, right? And so the whole world of procurement that we're going to talk about next time helps to get us into this kind of territory from this territory. Questions about that? Yeah, so this is kind of the why there's this difference between the prices of and the cost of generating electricity on the market versus what you guys pay in rates, in electricity rates. Does anyone recognize these plots, by the way? Yeah, these are the good old PG&E adverts, right? Yeah. And this one's got to be a couple years old because I see the peak is only 53 cents. I'm pretty sure we're at 63 cents now. Yeah.
I might be reading the plot wrong, but it seems like the day-ended price on the left is fluctuating more.
This one here?
The blue.
The blue, yeah. So this is gas, so I would just ignore this.
Yeah.
It's fluctuating more than what?
Well, then the gas line. Like,
oh, sure,
You have a
sure.
diurnal signal.
Yeah, but the
oh,
And so day ahead market is hourly and probably the gas price is daily. That could be part of it.
yeah.
I think you have a good point with like the renewable fluctuation.
Yeah, because so I think what you're saying is a good point. So these operate on slightly different timescales, and then also right with the electricity markets, it's not just comprised of gas generators. You've got a lot of other stuff in there. That's probably leading to some of those differences as well.
Okay.
Cool. So that hopefully gives you some grounding on the energy side of things. And then obviously there's all of this physical assets, right, that needs to get paid for. So we think about all the transmission lines, all that distribution infrastructure that we're also kind of familiar with at this point. How does that get paid for, and how does that get wrapped into your electricity bills? So paying for physical assets, probably the most kind of central thing to think about with that and the rates that you guys pay is something known as the rate base. And so what is the rate base? That is the value of the utility's investments in physical infrastructure. So if you just looked at how much it costs to pay for all of that transmission, all of the conduit, all the distribution, all those transformers, all of that infrastructure that's owned by a utility, that is the rate base. There's a really important nuance here, is that it has to be considered used and useful for serving customers. Why do you think we have that particular line in there? Yeah.
I was going to say like that there's a lot of ancillary services that might not be directly for certain customers. Like
Yep, so, yeah, very good point. So, if I have this backup generator, it's like some spinning reserve somewhere that literally is just spinning and waiting to get called on and never gets called on, it doesn't directly provide benefit to the customer, right? So the use part might not qualify, but it is useful for like reliability, right? So something like that would most likely be considered part of the rate base, right? Yeah.
Would something like a new office building qualify? I hope not, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, probably not. But I think the philosophy of this, I'm actually going maybe in a similar direction. But the philosophy of including this is really important, right? Because what is to stop a utility from producing too much inefficient infrastructure, right? Or infrastructure that they deem is necessary that maybe helps their bottom line, but might not be useful for serving customers, right? And so, we're going to talk about the procedure with which this stuff gets evaluated, but you kind of need this like foundation to be able to, let's say, challenge a utility on whether or not their infrastructure installation and deployment is necessary. Okay, so this includes things like transmission lines, substations and transformers, poles and wires, meters, IT systems. Does not allow for assets that are not in service, assets that are paid for by others, and then disallowed or imprudent costs.
Disallowed or imprudent costs.
Yeah. So let me give an example of this, which may be extra, maybe extra relevant. Let's say that I wanted to provide service to a rural customer, and I have this goal of undergrounding all of my transmission lines, and there's literally this one guy here that I need to bring electricity to a really long distance, and it cost me $1 billion to like service this one person. Or I could have bought a generator for that person and just put it on their property for like a couple $1,000s, right? I'm being a little facetious here, but maybe that's an example of like an imprudent cost, right?
No,
So
I think the exaggerated difference helps.
yeah, yeah, and so I might even argue that some of the stuff that they're doing now might be imprudent in terms of like cost.
Underground?
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be right, that does lend to some of the subjective nature of what's considered an imprudent cost, because certain measures taken may be deemed necessary by the utility, but it ultimately has to get approval from the PUC. But yeah, I would probably consider certain things that utilities are doing now as maybe considered imprudent, but who am I to argue against these utilities?
You're the person paying for it.
Yeah. So the disallowed or imprudent costs, I'm kind of alluding to this, right? But the reason why it's very compelling for a utility to want to increase this rate base is right here because of this formula. So we have this equation. So this is the revenue requirement is equal to the rate base times a parameter R, which is the rate of return, plus operations and maintenance, fuel, depreciation, and taxes. Okay. So the revenue requirement is the total amount of money that a utility is essentially allowed to charge all of its end customers, right? And so if we add up all of this stuff here on the right-hand side, you know, let's say that's $20 billion, then, you know, we're not yet talking about how that gets spread out to the customers, but what the Public Utilities Commission has allowed the utility to do is collect up to this $20 billion from your end user customers. So why have I singled out this rate base here? So unlike all of these other costs associated with utility operations, so operations and maintenance, fuel, depreciation, taxes, they spend money on that and then they get to collect that money back from the customers. It's a kind of break even. Where the utility actually makes money is through this rate base because they are allowed to earn some return on this. So your infrastructure, it's an incentive for utilities because they get this guaranteed rate of return to try and provide infrastructure that's used and useful, right? You can imagine if there was no rate of return, they can do kind of the maybe the sort of most minimum, the bare minimum to provide service to customers. Whereas with this, you do have an incentive to provide infrastructure that's useful to your end customers, but you also have to balance this against, well, the utility doesn't have to balance this, right? The Public Utilities Commission has to balance this against the fact that now you've created this incentive for them to want to install more infrastructure. Yeah, so this formula governs how much revenue a utility can collect from customers every year. Yeah.
So the rate base, is that, I mean, some infrastructure, the total value of it is not gonna, it gets installed and they pay for it, is that amortized somehow, or?
Yeah.
Because they shouldn't collect the whole value every year, right? They should-
Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna show, I have an example of this in just a second. Yeah. So it's based off of lifetime and some depreciation equation. Yeah.
I was just curious if like scarcity could change the valuation.
Of
Well, I guess, well, no.
brood on it a little bit and then ask me. So, to give you guys a sense of what the rate base looks like for our 3 investor-owned utilities in California, something like this, right? So on the order of billions of dollars, we're approaching the kind of $40 to $50 billion in San Francisco and LA, and San Diego is lower, but has been increasing over time as well.
Is that raw or inflation adjusted?
Oh, that's a good question. I think this is raw. Yeah. So inflation will play into some of this certainly. And then these 3 plots here break down for each of the utilities into components of the rate base. One piece of it being distribution, which is the largest piece up here. Transmission, these dots here, and then some small amount of generation. Well, I say small, it's $5 billion worth of generation assets. Yeah, so very typically in the larger IOUs in California, the distribution tends to kind of dominate the rate base. We used to. I mean, they're never all quite the same, but the general rule of thumb that I was kind of taught is that, but when I was in school in like Pennsylvania, that transmission, distribution, and generation typically were like a third, a third, a third. But obviously they're not always going to be exactly the same. And in California, our generation components tend to be quite a bit smaller, and transmission and distribution tend to be a little bit bigger. Part of that, right, is having to do with the fact that the utilities don't own the generation piece, but even when you account for the energy piece, the other two, yeah, on average are going to be higher in California. Yes.
So, technically, like Valley Clean Energy are also subject to like the same rules, right? On like what they can, like what kind of rates they can charge to get back their investment on generation.
No. Public, so only the investor-owned utilities are subject to the Public Utility Commission rules for rate setting. Valley Clean Energy, for example, they could technically set their rates at whatever they want. They have a board that needs to approve it. But remember that there is, for these like CCAs that are typically a little bit smaller, there is a baseline kind of price at which they're competing against, which is just PG&E, right? So if they're not beating PG&E's prices, then people will just exit the CCA.
PG&E's prices for generation.
Yeah. And that is, and so while the CCAs aren't directly regulated by the PUCs, in kind of a behind the scenes way, right, they're heavily influenced by the prices that end up getting set by the IOUs. We get the CEO of ECI to come talk about rate setting in a lot more detail if you want. But okay, let's move on and talk about infrastructure and how it relates to this revenue requirement equation, right? We can actually apply any sort of individual set of numbers for a particular piece of capital into how the revenue requirement will get formed. Okay, and so let's say you have a $50,000 transformer with a lifetime of 20 years with an allowable rate of return of 9%. We'll assume no taxes and O&M. We can do a return on the capital, right? So 4,500. So that basically says, if you install this thing, this is the extra amount of money that the utility can make. We can do like a straight line depreciation to understand the annualized cost recovery, and so your revenue requirement would just be something like this. So you would, I think this is a pretty simple like financing picture, but essentially you depreciate it over the lifetime and then treat that as the annualized cost. And it doesn't get too much more complicated than this, I think.
I mean, the interesting thing about that is that for an asset with a lifetime of 20 years, the utility is making the asset value in about 11 years, right? They're making the asset value back in 11 years, and they have 9 years where they're making more than they paid for the asset.
Yep. And that's actually, I saw.
4,500, 50,000 divided by 4,500. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. And I saw some numbers recently that they had actually structured the undergrounding for wildfires. That was like a special calculation for revenue requirements that was done in even a more aggressive way. I think they pay it back in like 4 years or something like that. I need to go back and double check. and then the rest of the lifetime is just like cash flowing in. Yeah.
Rate of return net of like inflation or separate?
No, so the rate of return is, yeah, I think it's separate. I mean, it's just one number. The basis of that number may already like behind the scenes have incorporated like inflation, so they don't actually explicitly try and include that as an extra thing because you'd be double counting in this equation. Yeah.
I have depreciation was the decrease in value of an asset over time.
Yes.
This looks like amortization.
So one way, one way of figuring out how you do the annualization is to just take the like depreciation value. You're essentially paying for, I guess how do you think of this physically? You're kind of like paying for the like value of the asset that's lost every year. Yeah.
Collecting enough money to replace it at the end of its life.
Yeah. The annualization can be done in many sort of different ways, but kind of at the end of the day, as long as you recovered the capital over the lifetime, that's, I think, the most important thing. And in this case, it's just some kind of, straight line assumption that they're doing. Did you? Yeah. Okay. So revenue requirements are essentially, right, the amount of money that they can charge, but then how do we get from that to this like cents per kilowatt hour, right? So maybe you have an annual revenue requirement of like $700 million. Some of that's coming from fixed costs, some of that's variable costs. And then you have some annual sales of electricity. Right, it's not rocket science. We can figure out an average cost of electricity by dividing the revenue requirement by total sales. And so in this case, if I just took $700 million divided by 10 gigawatt hours, that could come out to something like 7 cents a kilowatt hour. And so there is a little bit more nuance in this. We're going to talk about how they think about this for sort of different customer classes and then different rate structures and what those rate structures are kind of meant to try and do. But why don't we take a quick break right now? This is a good spot for it. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and then we will continue.
What was he doing? You were saying something about depreciation.
Depreciation is a non-cash expense, so it's not a real thing. It's basically you deploy an asset and you pay every year it's passed, the lifetime goes down. So it's basically getting the value of an asset over that period. It is done to save on taxes because taxable income is what? Revenue minus expense.
So that you're not taxed on like the full value of the thing
Full
every
value
year.
of it, on the other side. So instead you depreciate each and every year, like the same.
Isn't it, how does an asset actually lose value?
So if you imagine
Just
like,
by existing
imagine like a
needs.
car.
So I buy an iPad for $1,000.
Sure.
A lifetime, or the life of an iPad could be 4 years. So every 4 years I would depreciate $250. If I'm an accounting firm and I'm not depreciated. But that might not be the case
Yeah, so let me, I guess, say it back to you, so it's, you start with like the entire value of the thing, and it has some lifetime, and every year it has less time to exist, so you've already used up some yearly value of its total value, and that's just, I guess, depreciation.
Yeah.
There's like a physical depreciation, and then there's like a financial
Yeah, I can
depreciation.
understand it with a car.
Yeah.
Because like you buy a 15-year-old used car, it has a significantly lower value because of its limited lifetime. But I guess when it comes to just a purely financial concept, it's a little nebulous.
I mean, it is related to that, right? Because if you buy an old car, the financial depreciation is related directly to the physical depreciation, right? You can only get so much out of it. So in a similar way, like if you bought a brand new transformer versus a 15-year-old transformer, much like a car, there's physical depreciation that's happened that
Only has,
lowers
like,
the
a quarter of its lifetime,
Yeah.
and therefore a quarter of its value left in it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the accounting part may be a little bit confusing. It's like, why are we using the depreciation piece? It's more about just making sure that you are in some way recovering what you've spent on it. And so they just,
In the accounting part, they don't use a straight line depreciation. They use a system called MACRS, which is a modified accelerated cost of the system, in which you depreciate a larger amount in the first 2 years so that you could reduce your taxable income in the first 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not always linear.
It's not always linear.
yeah, that was like a very simplified
Yeah,
way
it's-
of just showing that you make the money back.
Depreciates by some, I don't know, 5% a year or something.
Yeah.
But that's also a simplified case.
Yeah.
If you're, like that transformer example, you said like the life
Well, thank
was
you.
20 years, that's an estimate, right? But then hypothetically, what if it's actually useful for 30 years? Do they have to pay back the depreciation that they earned, or how does that work?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think that there is, well, I might be wrong about this, but my assumption is that in the analysis of any particular infrastructure, there's like a robust enough of a job done that there could be extra benefits kind of going one way or the other, right? That on average should kind of wash out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are they allowed to collect that return forever or just for the lifetime of the asset?
Over the lifetime of that. Well, I mean, this is kind of like your question, right? I think it's until the like true lifetime of the asset. Yeah.
That'd be crazy if they could do it forever because they're already collecting money to basically replace it.
Yeah.
Also getting
No, no,
money.
no.
It's like otherwise they just keep building and building and you just get like.
If it lasts longer than it's expected, then you get some of that benefit. But like, it will break, like the analysis isn't made up, right? It's like that has to get vetted by PUC. They're gonna be like, oh, why did you say the lifetime of this transformer is like 2 years? Like that doesn't make any sense.
But
Yeah.
then when they replace it, they don't get return on the replacement, or do they?
Well, when they build a new infrastructure, that's like a new piece of the rate base.
But how can they do that? Because they collected money to replace it all along. It feels wrong for them to then.
Oh, but they've had to spend money up front to do it, right? So it balances. There's like a chicken and egg thing going on here.
Yeah, I mean, generally one thinks of return as you put in money and you get out money, right?
Yeah.
So, but you don't collect to replace it. You just get money. But then it seems weird to me that you would then go out to replace it and then still collect return on the replacement and collecting money to replace it all this time. Like if I built an oil refinery, for example, well.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a little semantic, I think, because whether you're paying for the next thing or you're paying for that thing, like the money still balances, right? There's a question, there's I guess a philosophy at the beginning or the end of like, oh, this money should be allocated for, but it's not like that money can get pocketed by someone, right? It's always paying for the next thing, or you're talking about paying for the last thing. It's one of those ways,
Yeah.
right? So. Okay. So that is like the theory of the sort of rate base so that you guys can understand. And then when we think about how in practice this stuff all gets set, right? So all these assumptions about things like the lifetime, what's allowed to be in the rate base, and then rate design, which we haven't talked about, but we'll get to. How is that actually decided and formed, right? So this goes through a process known as the GRC, a general rate case. And this is a very comprehensive regulatory proceeding. I think a lot of what I'm talking about with the GRC is going to pertain kind of more specifically to California, but you can imagine that there is some kind of analog to this in most places where utilities are kind of regulated, right? And so IOUs in states that maintain cost of service regulation, so PG&E, classic example, but then in some other balancing areas, you have utilities like Xcel Energy in Colorado, Duke Energy on the East Coast, Con Edison, right, which serves New York City. These are all examples of utilities that will go through kind of this general rate case process. All right. So what does this look like? You have a utility that files a general rate case application. And in this application, they will submit it to the Public Utilities Commission and then go through this giant 4-year cycle. And actually PG&E finished their general rate case application last year, I believe, or a year and a half ago. And so you have forecasted expenses, right? And so the utility has to do all this work to figure out, oh, this is how much load I expect in the future. Here's all the infrastructure I need to deploy to be able to meet that load. And then there's discussion about the rate of return and what that should be. And that will end up boiling down into this forecasted revenue requirement, right? Which is that total amount of money that they're allowed to charge. This is a pretty lengthy process. So in kind of the meantime that the utilities are trying to do all this, right, they are spending money, and they're balancing accounts. And then it could be that certain things unexpected happens, like a giant wildfire that you suddenly become responsible for. And that may go into adjusting some of the stuff within the general rate case proceeding, right? All of that plays into like this interim, all this interim stuff may be an adjustment for the final sort of advice letter. And that is going to ultimately translate into utility rates in some way, and we'll talk about that rate design in a bit, which then is what ratepayers are going to end up paying out of their pockets. That goes into the revenues, and right, and that's how you're sort of balancing your accounts. Any questions about this process?
They can reset them every 4 years. Does this process take 4 years?
No. The GRC happens basically every 4 years, but the actual like approval process for a GRC is not quite as long, and I'll talk about that in a second. Yes.
Why do they keep track of unauthorized costs if they can't really get their money back on them?
Well, there's a question of whether or not they're allowed to get money back on certain things, or if there should be coverage for certain types of things that's not included in the initial GRC. So for example,
Okay.
like the wildfire happens, and then
They replace transformers and lines and they
Yeah.
ask for all that ahead of time, but it's still necessary to maintain.
exactly,
service.
exactly, yep.
When a utility have to make a capital investment, do they have to talk with CPUC before making a capital investment? Because at the end of the day, the rate base will include that, isn't it? So what's stopping a utility in gold plating such a way that you could overinvest in your capital? Because at the end of the day, you'll get 9% rate of return anyway.
Well, that's why the GRC is super, super important. Is this process is the forecasting of expenses is like where that happens, right? So you as a utility cannot be like, oh, let me just go and throw out like $50 billion of transmission line everywhere. I think that'll be great for our community, right? And I'll get a big rate of return. It's not that for every individual like purchase that you make, you go to the PUC, but that you may generally say, oh, over the next 4 years, I need to spend $20 billion on infrastructure. And then the PUC will say, okay, show me all the proof of all the things that you want to spend money on. And then if there may be negotiations and say, no, you can only spend $15 billion, right? And so that's what you're allowed to charge customers. You as a utility could like go out and build stuff, but you may not get guaranteed that you're gonna get paid back for it, much less than get a rate of return on it from customers, unless you can prove that it belongs in the revenue requirement or it belongs as part of your rate base. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a individual piece of infrastructure asking, it is this proof in the future generally that I need to do all this stuff, and then you're kind of discretionarily spending to make that stuff happen and then get paid for it. Okay, so who is involved with the rate setting? We talked about our PUC commissioners before, right? And so they are going to approve, they're ultimately the ones who approve a general rate case and adopt certain rules and regulations surrounding them. There is an administrative judge who kind of oversees the process. And then who are the people who are going to be presenting cases to this in these proceedings? Well, obviously the utilities, right? They are the party, the most sort of applicable party. But you might want someone there to like push back against like the utility saying, oh, I need to do all this XYZ stuff, right? You can be like, wait, do you actually need to do all of this undergrounding? Do you need to do all of this type of measure, right? And you have advocate organizations. So Cal Advocates is a really important piece of that. So there's the Public Advocate's Office within the PUC themselves have a set of like lawyers who are meant to represent and advocate on the behalf of the customer. Okay, and so they're the ones who, in theory, are going to try and push back against unnecessary and undue overreach of infrastructure deployment. And then you can have other advocates as well. They can be like CBOs, community-based organizations, nonprofits, right, who are able to push back against utilities advocating for certain things. I will say, I don't want to be like too biased here, but the utility, if you like see the size of their like legal teams that are involved with these proceedings, and the amount of money that they spend here, right? This is where the rubber hits the road for them to be able to make profits, right? like the decision that comes out of these proceedings. So they really throw the kitchen sink in terms of resources at these proceedings, and it can be very difficult for some of these independent organizations to like keep up with some of this stuff.
Do you think it's like purposeful administrative fatigue?
I mean, yeah, a little bit to some extent, but
Sounds like lawyers. You know?
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's,
But I mean, the decisions coming out of here are like billions of dollars on the bottom line of these utilities, right? So some of it is necessary, but yeah, I mean, I would tend to think in the sort of recent times that a lot of the rate increases might be attributable to a level that might be in excess of what is needed. Okay, so kind of a breakdown of what this looks like over kind of the 4 years. So you file an application, and then there's a whole series of things kind of sketched out over these timelines that show kind of the process that this happens in like a rough sketch of the actual timeline, right? And so things like when are certain like public workshops being held, when are proceedings open for advocacy organizations to come in and do certain things, when are hearings actually scheduled. I'm not going to go through all of this. Maybe I'll just kind of leave this as a reference for you guys. Yeah, in case you're kind of just interested in understanding the types of processes that kind of go into when certain things happen in this proceeding timeline. Yeah, usually once you're in phase 2, there's an issuance of a final decision, maybe like a year and a half into that whole process.
why are the two applications? Like, it's the blue boxes, this is one to start phase 1, and then another application after phase 1 is completed? Just kind of curious.
So phase 1, I believe, is generally to determine the revenue requirement, and then phase 2 is like rate design and then allocation of rates. Yeah, so they typically happen in like 2 separate processes. So let's think about an or maybe a set of examples where a utility is going to be proposing something in a GRC, and we can think about why it would make sense on the utility side, and then what you might push back on if you were an intervener in these proceedings, right? So let's say, you know, our typical rate of return on equity is 9%, and they want to bump that up to 10.25%, right? And so they may say, okay, we need a competitive return to attract capital for reliability and to help fund climate adaptation projects. If you were an intervener, how might you push back? Who wants to be an advocate for the end consumer? what are the implications of raising the rate of return?
Electricity rates go up, the
Yeah.
burden of cost is higher on the consumer.
Yeah. So it exceeds national averages for returns. Excessive return on equity is going to drive costs up. And basically, you're just enriching stakeholders, right? So, I mean, there's no guarantee that they would spend it on these like climate adaptation projects, right? Okay, now the utility wants to spend $800 million to modernize the grid. So why might a utility want to do this besides making more money?
Well, it ensures their business going forward, longevity, reduce risks, and
Yeah.
they also have, you know, after it's paid off, many years of making money on it.
I don't think they will ever be making the argument that like, oh, we need to make more money. I think it'll be usually grounded in other things. But yeah, so maybe they want to invest in like automation and wildfire production. They want more hosting capacity for DER services, right? And so yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just walk through these, right? So the projects might not be fully justified. Why don't we use like non-wires alternatives or third-party DERs, right? And so there are like lots of these types and flavors of arguments often being made. Hard fixed charges, right? So fixed costs don't change with usage. So we should be making sure revenues are more stable to ensure fairness with higher fixed charges. But an intervener may argue, well, these fixed charges are going to be more regressive, right?
Fixed charges are like transmission, like use.
Yeah, so the costs affiliated with things that don't get paid, well, that don't change with how much you use electricity. Yeah. Lower volumetric rates. This balances cost recovery, reduces energy price distortion, but on the other hand, discourages conservation, undermines price signals for energy efficiency, right? And so you can imagine that in the world of like the general rate case, that utilities are trying to push lots of different levers to, yeah, I mean, right? I mean, none of these arguments are totally unreasonable, right? These are not just arguments about trying to make more money. And so a lot of the pushback that happens from interveners, you're often thinking about like impacts to specific groups of folks and being able to push back against some of these proposals. No, that should be every 4 years. It should be every 4 years, not every 3 years for California. And then you can see, I mean, that there's this general rate case process, and they may differ a little bit from state to state. Again, I'm not going to go into detail to walk through all this stuff. I'll just leave it kind of as a reference if you guys ever need to understand how different states do general rate cases differently. And they cover, you know, some examples of the utilities that they cover, and these are generally some of the sort of bigger ones. Okay. Let's talk about a big important topic on rate design. So we've talked about, broadly speaking, the sort of amounts of money that they can charge customers, but we haven't really discussed how the rates themselves are designed. And you could do this in many different ways to achieve different sets of goals, right? So revenue sufficiency. You want to make sure that you have stable revenue to to make sure you make all that money from the revenue requirement back. And you could literally just charge all your customers a flat fee to do that, right? Cost reflectiveness, you want to align prices with the actual system costs. Equity, you want to ensure fairness across income, usage types. Efficiency, you want price signals to encourage certain types of behavior. And then you don't want the rates to be too obscure, right? And so simplicity and predictability is, important from a sort of philosophical perspective. Although, I would maybe argue, I don't know how necessarily like simple our bills are today. We'll go through some examples, and it can be a little bit confusing to parse through. Okay, so here are some common rate structures that people talk about that are either implemented today or are like, known enough that that folks, I think, in this area are kind of generally familiar. So flat rate, this is where you fix it to some dollar per kilowatt hour or cents per kilowatt hour, kind of regardless of usage, and that's probably the simplest way you could do it, and that's was a lot more common in the past, and still a lot of smaller municipal utilities still do this, but in places like California, this is becoming a lot less common. So we are actually all on by default time of use rates. We're actually on time of use and tiered rates. Prior to this transition happening, does anyone know when we all switched to time of use? Does anyone remember?
I guess 2016.
Yeah, I actually don't know the actual answer. I can't quite remember. There was in the last, like within the last 10 years or so, there's a point at which a lot of us were like opting into time of use. And so maybe the transition was less noticeable to us, but there was a certain point at which that then became kind of the default. So prior to time of use, we were on tiered rates, and so that means you use some electricity, you pay for it on a cents per kilowatt hour, much like the flat rate, but then once you hit a threshold of usage, you would jump up in tier, right? And so you'd be tier 1, you only pay like 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and then if you consume like, I don't know, make up a number like 100 kilowatt hours of electricity within a single month, then everything past that you are on tier 2 and you have to pay like 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's a tiered rate. Time of use, hopefully everyone knows what that means. Basically, at certain times of the day you pay a rate, and at a different time of the day you pay a different rate. In PG&E, we have tier time of use, which we'll look at in just a second. And then real-time pricing is like if prices were to more closely match with like wholesale markets. For a number of reasons, this is a little bit more rare. You don't really see this commonly deployed in like non-pilot programs, in like broader public programs yet. Yeah.
What does CNI mean?
Where is that? Commercial and industrial. Yeah. So certain customers do have real-time rates. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you have a electric vehicle, I think that you're encouraged to use real time or something like that.
Well, with real time, so actually EVs, actually is this even in here? No, it's not. EVs, you might, so in California for the major IOUs, you can be on special EV rates that are different time of use rates where the peak times are a lot higher and then your base times might be a little bit lower, but it's not real time rates.
Okay.
They're different type of time of use. Yeah.
Are you going to participate in that Valley Clean Energy Dynamic
I've been meaning to talk to Mitch, but I keep forgetting. I would like to, but yeah.
I can send you the survey.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Demo cases, if you have time.
Yeah.
they do.
Demo.
They've all got an app that.
An app, yeah.
Yeah. I'll talk about why it's not as widespread in a moment. So PG&E, this is a combination of tiered and time of use rates. So let's take a look at, oh, this is definitely quite old, 42 cents. How quaint. Yeah, so there's a dotted line here that you guys see, and then above that, like a higher thing that's happening. So the dotted line represents what you would be paying in your first tier. So if you consume under a threshold, you would pay 28 cents off peak, 34 cents on peak, which is 4 to 9 p.m. For this particular plan in PG&E, and then back down to 28 cents after 9 p.m. And then once you hit your threshold of use, you then pay 35 cents, 42 cents, and 35 cents. Now I think we're at 36 cents base, 63 cents in the peak, which is a lot. Yeah. And then they also will have different rates depending on the season that you're in, and they give the kind of dates for that. And then there are different rate types, right? So ETOUD is a non-tiered rate where like the peak is going to be in between, and then in the winter season, like it's going to be closer to the tier 2, and so you get this sort of balance. And you could like figure out the math to they actually have these calculators that are like, oh, what if I was on a different use a rate design? How much money would I have paid for like last year's bills? And so you can switch sometimes based on what makes financial sense for you. Okay, so that's an example of a time of use that's also tiered. So why isn't real-time prices widespread? This might be a better representation of like the marginal cost of energy, right? And so when we were looking at the table before on cost reflectiveness, that second category, this would better align prices with the system costs. But there are a whole slew of barriers to why this isn't sort of as widespread. It requires more advanced metering infrastructure. You need different billing systems. There's more complexity, and on the consumer awareness side, they don't necessarily like to deal with the volatility of the market. And so, for nerds like me, who might be interested in participating in a pilot program that does real-time prices, that might be too complex for a residential user to want to kind of try and respond to in real time. There is some risk in this. So, I mentioned the like Texas incident where the LMPs jumped up really high. So there actually are some vendors in Texas who tie their rates to real-time prices, and the customers were actually directly exposed to those prices during those outages, and so they ended up with bills of like tens of thousands, if not like millions of dollars, I think. There is some risk there. Equity concerns, that like if you have price spikes, right, in your wholesale market, that may affect low-end customers a lot more in a disproportionate way. And then there's a whole, like the regulatory and political piece of this that could be kind of pushing back against the ability of utilities to implement real-time pricing. Okay, so it is, people often view real-time prices as positive in terms of like its ability to kind of better reflect prices, but there are lots of barriers, and it isn't so widespread right now. Okay, so let's talk about an energy bill. So this is yeah, PG&E itself actually has this whole thing that like tries to break down the bills. So I kind of just walk through this. So this is something similar to what you might see. So PG&E electric delivery charges, item 2. This is what you guys are actually paying for the physical like infrastructure that connects the power generation to you, right? That's all the like wires that go in between. And then the electric generation, note here that this has MCE, so that is a CCA in the Bay Area. That's what you actually pay for the energy. And so whoever, this example that we're looking at is of someone who is in a CCA. And the reason why, right, so just because you're in a CCA, you're still getting a PG&E bill because your electricity is delivered through PG&E, but then components of the bill are going to be kind of carved out for the CCA, so item 3. Here, what we would see is if you are a part of Valley Clean Energy, you would see VCE electric generation charges instead of MCE. Okay, so we got this whole list of things here. Your electric charges breakdown. So what are we looking at? Conservation incentive. This is a credit that PG&E provides for using low electricity. So you have transmission and distribution. Those I think are pretty straightforward, right? This is the idea that we take that revenue requirement that's associated with transmission and distribution and then kind of allocate that in a certain way over the customers, and that you end up paying some amount of money for all this. The next one, electric public purpose programs, funds that the state mandates. So low income assistance, energy efficiency, EPIC, which is a California Energy Commission program to fund research and development and innovation. You got renewable programs. The next item, nuclear decommissioning, is the cost of retiring nuclear power plants, right? So you have to pay for, the decommissioning of like San Onofre, right, that we've talked about before.
Why is it a negative now?
No. Wait, is it?
It's -3 cents.
I have no idea. Someone can look that up and tell me.
Okay.
Yeah. Wildfire fund charge. So this is state mandated contribution for liability protection, right? So they're found liable, they can't actually pay. State ends up socializing some of those costs. Wildfire hardening charge, cost recovery for physical investments to reduce wildfire risk. That's a piece that's going to get bigger and bigger, and is going to be connected to the transmission and distribution piece. There's for some reason pieces of it are separated out from the transmission and distribution. Recovery bond charge and credits. Energy cost recovery, competition transition charges, and then the last one, PCIA. This is an adjustment that is for customers using other access providers like CCAs to cover legacy contracts. And so, we were talking about bills trying to be simple to kind of understand, and to some degree, like if we just had that transmission distribution piece, I think that would be a lot easier, obviously, right? But there are lots of these other like programs and things that either the utility partakes in or are required to partake in that end up as like separate line items on a bill. Yeah.
So, is the PCIA to help PG&E recover cost on like long-term power purchase agreements that they're not making their direct money back on, because that's not energy that this customer's using?
Yeah, I think so. Although, I don't know. I guess I kind of question why they would be allowed to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same thing with me also. I never got the sense of PCIA. Let's say me, I came into this company 2 years back.
Yeah.
Even in my bill, I could see a PCIA charge.
Yeah.
Because I use PCE. When PG&E made those contracts, I wasn't even in the company to make those estimations. So why should I incur that charge? Although I wasn't even in the planning phase of the contract they signed for a charge to be incurred. So
Well, I mean, I think.
if as a person I change my utility, okay, I get that. But if in the first place I'm not even here part of the contract, then why should I still pay my
Well, I'm not sure that is the logic that I would use because it's not like every customer like partakes in the decision-making process for any of this stuff to happen, right? And so the CPUC isn't going to say, oh, track all the customers that you have currently, and they are like implicit or they are complicit with the decision making at the time that it happens. It's more that the PUC is like, no, you guys are allowed to do this recovery, PCIA thing, and the customers, they kind of just have to deal with it, right? Whether or not they're a new customer or an old customer. I think the real argument is like, they made bad hedges. Why do we have to pay for that? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
So there isn't really an incentive to change the utility because at the end of the day you would get a PCI charge anyway.
Yes, except that the incentive for the customer, right? So it actually provides incentives on the utility and on the customer side. So for the customer, the electric generation charges may be more competitive with the CCA, and so that I think is the driving force for actually doing the switching, right? With the PCIA, it's like it's this extra bit that everyone ends up having to pay, right? And so it kind of washes out the like benefit, or it washes out the difference that you're talking about with the CCA and staying in the same utility. Okay. So let's see. Okay, 5. That is your rate schedule. That's the particular rate type that you're subject to, right? So this is a time of use with peak pricing from 4 to 9. Baseline credit. Okay, so this is a discount on electricity for electricity use below a baseline allowance. This is the tiered rates that I was talking about. So for some amounts under a baseline, you're going to get a discounted price. And so that's what's being kind of explicitly shown here. For the generation, credit. This is what you would have been charged by PG&E, but you get credited this since you pay electricity from the CCA. So there's actually a nice way to do this like comparison, right? So here, my generation credit is what? Wait, ish. Am I looking at the right? Yeah. Right. And if I compare that against if I go back to page 1, and I compare that to my electric generation charges, right? Should I be in this CCA or should I be with the default utility?
You made the right choice.
Right, because if I was with the utility, I would have paid $70, but here we can see with the CCA, I'm only paying $26.
I think you gotta add PCIA to that too.
Yes, yes. It's only $4.50, so we're good.
Theoretically.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Valley Clean Energy tends to, you add PCIA and their rate is very, very close to what you would have paid.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, and then, oh yeah, the PCIA is, they include that as a line item here. So they make that math a little bit easier, although I guess they could have added the other one over here too, so I didn't have to flip pages to look at that difference. All right, and then, so we already talked about 8, and then franchise fee surcharge, this pays for PG&E's right to use, like public streets to run electricity service to your home. So that's some payments for like land lease costs to the utility. And then a couple of last miscellaneous fees. Deep Green, so this is an opt-in service. So you pay a little bit extra, and that helps to fund like local community projects. And so oftentimes there are these little programs that you can opt into that will, that all of the like, the charging for those programs happens through the utility bills. Local taxes, and then Energy Commission tax. These are fees to fund our California Energy Commission. Yeah, so lots of things get, to roll into these bills. Anyone have any questions about any of this? Might be a good exercise for you guys to go and look at your bills and see if you can, any of this helps to kind of demystify that a little bit.
Are we gonna go over a bill that uses NEM3 later?
We certainly could. Does anyone have NEM3 bill?
I volunteer.
You volunteer? Okay, we could do that. Oh, I don't like going through NEM bills though, because those are even more outrageous.
Don't judge me after.
I mean, this is like, I don't know. I feel like I know a decent amount of stuff on this, and my wife, she like brought me our bill, and she was like, "Okay, walk me through this," and I was like, starting to like trip off and get confused myself, because we're on NEM 2, so there is so actually we will talk about NEM later on in today's lecture, which will roll into next lecture. But that's okay. So that you guys have a sense of what NEM is, how it works, some of the philosophies and controversies behind it. I'm happy to do that. Bring in your bill. We can throw it up and dissect it. Maybe we can look at my NEM 2.0 bill in comparison. Yeah. Does anyone have a NEM 1.0? No way, really? Okay, I wanna see your bill too. How outrageous it is, and we can all rage at you for.
Pretty sure I'm done with
I'll
Okay.
send you the PDF.
I'm still on E1. I'm still on a tiered rate. Is that only allowed in NEM 1.0? I think.
How are you on? Like you're not on a time of use?
Yeah, I've resisted it. I've been able to stay on. I think it's a NEM 1 benefit.
You guys are ridiculous. Yes.
I'll bring you the bill.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to look at. Okay, there are a number of other sort of price structures that are related to ways that customers can get charged that we'll talk about as well. We'll go through some of these. Most of what we had kind of reviewed are components of rates that are mainly residential facing. A lot of these categories of things you might see in different settings that are, larger customer classes, right? I'm trying to think. For you wouldn't see any of this stuff from the university's side, right? Because a lot of this is going to be more on the,
There's demand charges in some of those.
okay, you guys do get demand charges at the transmission level.
No, they're just commercial rates for not main campus, but other.
Okay, yes,
other
okay.
Research Park Drive.
That makes sense, yes. Okay, so demand charge is a pretty big common one. This is usually for commercial and industrial customers. And when we think about charging for electricity, it's like you use some amount and then you pay based off how much you use, right? A demand charge works a little bit differently. It's based on the maximum amount of kilowatt demand in a billing period. And so let's suppose that my electricity use looks something like this, and I have a spike in my load at some point. I actually pay a charge that's connected not with how much electricity use there is. In fact, this blue shape down here could literally be anything, as long as it's below that peak load. And then you would get assessed some kind of fee for that peak load. And so what is the impetus behind that? So imagine you're a really big customer, right? And you need you understand that you have this kind of peak load. And as a result of having such a high, peak load, maybe the utility needs to put in, maybe they need to upgrade the substation, or they need to put in a lot more conduit, or they have to buy a much more expensive transformer just for you, just for that one little peak that you have, right? Now, in theory, like you could be making that money back across the sort of energy and load demands that are happening. But in maybe an extreme case like this, maybe you only hit that peak like once a month, right? And so your volumetric charges would need to be really high to compensate for that. And so the demand charge is basically a way that says, okay, you've asked me to install a really big pipe, right, to ship you all this electricity to let you meet these peak loads. I'm gonna recover that capital in a slightly different way by tying it to the amount of that pipe that you're going to use, as opposed to the electricity flowing through it, right? This can encourage customers to try and smooth your demand and avoid some of those spikes, right? Because now you're incentivized to maybe not do this spike and lower your demand charge. But can be problematic for in certain conditions. Yeah.
So, according to like the, I guess the service provider, the customer injecting like solar energy back into the grid still counts as load? I guess it's still like approaches the capacity of the line.
Yes, and that's the important part. But as it pertains to peak load, let me think here. I haven't thought about that particular example. Yeah, I suppose if there's like enough DER capacity going back into the grid, you could in reverse need infrastructure that would be able to handle that, and ostensibly that you could assess a demand charge, although I guess it depends on the type of DER. If it's something that's not as flexible, like if it's like solar, like a bunch of solar rooftop stuff, I'm not sure it would make a lot of sense to assess a demand charge, because in those cases, it's not like the customers can really do anything to, well, that's not true. They could install a bunch of storage. So yeah, maybe. So yeah, I haven't really thought about it in that context, but I suppose if your DER generation was big enough, yeah, then you might assess a demand charge, and that might incentivize a customer to like purchase some storage as well to smooth those peaks out. Other types, critical peak pricing. This is kind of like a peak price, but we think of this as like sometimes it's called critical peak pricing. I've heard it called super peak before, where you have even higher rates during certain times to really sort of help disincentivize demand at certain times and to shift that load around. Yeah, and that is a way to rely on your end customers to help smooth out the load. Yeah, and that's going to be tied to the higher cost of like production of electricity at certain times. Yeah, the ironic thing here. So the critical peak pricing in these events, well, I should say that the critical peak pricing can spike your price even higher than what the peaks are giving. But I was just looking at these peak prices. Even SMUD's peak is below PG&E's lowest tier, which is a little ridiculous. But yeah. Anyways, the peak prices really are quite a bit higher to disincentivize use. You can see that like the ordinary peak would be 35 cents in SMUD, but it goes up to like 84 cents at a critical peak price event. And that's a kind of like an emergency measure that the utility can take to curb demand. This is like a one step before you do load shedding, right? Like this is a way that you can induce a strong shift in behavior.
And it says that it's only applied when there's a peak event.
Yes. Yeah. So you wouldn't be paying that 85 cents all the time, right? This would just be like that once or twice a year where like, oh shit, we're like running out of generation, right? Remember, there's like a whole slew of procedures that operators and utilities can take to maintain the balance. This is one of the things that you do on the demand side.
How
Yeah.
would we know that there was a peak event?
So if you enroll in this program, you would get some kind of like notification that it's happening. And usually they'll be able to tell you ahead of time. Yeah.
Earlier in the day.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. That's all I can get through today. Or I may actually at this point readjust our schedule just a little bit. Yeah, sorry I'm not able to get through all the slides. We're yeah, first time teaching this. I don't know how long it takes for me to get through some of this sometimes. So I may readjust the syllabus a little bit. We may lose on a little bit of content, but I think we'll do all right.
Facing may be a bit more on target.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll see you guys all on Thursday, and yeah, until then.
An inch of rain on Thursday, so be ready for that.